I'm just, I don't know if you've heard this, but more Americans are poor now. Have you heard this? More Americans are poor. So there's a few questions that we really need to ask ourselves. If we're going to engage in critical thinking and we really want to try to solve things, we need to say, well, wait, why? Why? More Americans are poor. Why? What causes poverty? What cures poverty? What does history tell us about poverty? And then the second question is, well, what? More Americans are poor. What does that mean? More people living under the poverty line now. 46 million people. That's 15% of our population have now fallen into the poor category. That's horrible. That's what's being reported everywhere. America's most dire poverty snapshot. That's how they're reporting it. And a, quote, crisis situations. Another fine accomplishment by this president. But before we give President Obama all the credit for poverty, which he does not deserve, there is another part of this story. Every media outlet is reporting on the poverty level. They just take the census at their word that 46 million people are now living in squalor without asking the question right here. Can you define it? Can you define it? How do you define poverty? Now, you think of families who go days and days and days without any food, without any clean water, who have to live in parks, not because, not because of any fault of their own. They're willing to work. My father lived in a shelter when he was young. He worked hard, but he could not afford a place, so he lived at the YMCA. He worked hard. So those people who have no shelter, no access to hospitals or doctors, when I say access, that means they do have access, they just have to go to a hospital and get free, and we all pay for that. They don't have clean clothes, they don't have anywhere to turn for help. That's not even the situation here in New York City. There are more beds than there are homeless people here in New York City. But I suppose there are places outside of New York City where the poor exist, and there aren't beds. Yes, there are places outside of New York City like that. What? Media should look into that from time to time. But the next question is, does that really sound like the snapshot of America? All the poor. I don't want to make light of any struggles that people are going through, because many definitely are going through real struggles. But the government just reported this week that 46 million Americans are now living in poverty. If you said, well, that doesn't sound like what's happening in America, depending on how you define poor, you'd be correct. I want to show you some stats that the rest of the media is not going to show you. The Heritage Foundation came out with a report on American poverty. I'll just show you some of the amenities among the poor. I didn't know the poor had amenities. Refrigerator, 99%. Televisions, 97%. Stove and oven. At least one VCR, 70%. More than one television. I mean, see, when I think of the poor, I think of people who don't have television. See, because if you have a television now, you have to have cable because of what the federal government did. Now you have to, now it's all digital. So you can't have the rabbit ears anymore. So if you have television, you also have cable. I'm sorry, if you have cable, I don't really define you as poor. 78% have air conditioning. 53% have a dryer. 17% of the poor in America have big screen TVs. What? Now, you can be struggling. You can really be struggling and have all of these things. But that's not poor. When you compare these to all U.S. households, you can see that all U.S. households are not that far off. What was it, 17% for big screen TVs? It's 27% for the general population. At least one VCR, 79. What was it on the other one, 67%? I mean, it's 69% for one television, 77% here. I mean, hello? It's not that far off. Now, the typical poor America poor American had more living space than the average European. Here it is, 2005. Wait a minute. Is that the latest census? Square feet per dwelling. Per dwelling, 1,400. 1,500 for each individual. The European average, smaller. The poor house is better than a European house. Again, poor people do have a problem. It's just that the problem that you're seeing is food. The problem is gas. The problem here is that sometimes we're not really poor. We're in hard times. There are Americans that are suffering through poverty. Some are. But most are suffering through hard times. That's different. That's different. The international poverty line is currently anyone who earns $8.75 per week or less. By comparison, the United States poverty line is those who earn $427 per week or less. Despite the seemingly overwhelming evidence that living in poverty in America is still a better standard than the average living in most other countries, the other countries will view our poor not as poor, but as the rich. Our foreign friends are absolutely having a field day now with the poor numbers in America. They are desperate to highlight what they perceive to be a failure of capitalism. Al Jazeera, of course, highlighting this. The Tehran Times, the Chinese media, the Russian media are all piling on and declaring an end to the American economic dominance.
GBTV. The truth lives here.